high-profile, politically charged legal case. Crown prosecutors, in a surprise, deciding not to move forward with their case against Vice-Admiral Mark Norman, once the #2 man in the Canadian military, later accused of leaking cabinet documents. This is him. Fired, his reputation ruined, arguably. Now the government effectively dropping the charges against him. CTV's Don Martin is standing by, the host of Power Play. Don, what do you think?
Wow. Certainly it is good news for the Liberals because on two fronts. First of all, this is not going to be a campaign boilerplate going on. They're going to be a trial that would have probably coincided with the campaign in September. Secondly, they do have the ability to fight back because there was emphatic denials from all sides in the courtroom that there had been any political interference. They left it open to say, wow, there was a lot of politics orbiting this thing, but if there was any attempted interference, it didn't work. So the Liberals, as you saw, Todd, are reciting their talking points, sometimes without even taking their eyes off the script in the question period today, even though they're under pretty sustained attack by opposition forces that believe that there's more to this than we've seen, which very well may be. Who knows?
So speaking of those talking points, they're saying over and over again, Don, you know, there was no political interference. The prosecutors made this decision on their own because, of course, there is this story about SNC-Lavalin blowing around as well. So, you know, what are the optics, do you think, of all of this?
Well, keep in mind, the same individual, the same director of public prosecutions, was the one the Trudeau government was trying to influence to get SNC out of a trial. She didn't, and we wouldn't have even known about that going on had it not been for somebody that talked to the Globe and Mail, and then Jody Wilson-Raybould's response to that. So it's possible that the government was trying a similar thing here to get this case A, put it forward, or B, get it dropped. Who knows? But it sounds like this is something where the government's not quite in that same ballpark, Todd, that there really wasn't any overt pressure going on the director. She looked at evidence that the defense put forward. Something in that evidence, which we may never see, by the way, triggered something to make her think this case cannot be won, and she called off the legal beagle. So it's over as far as the legalities go, although keep in mind a stay doesn't mean it's forever off the books. It means we're not going forward at this time and won't go forward unless there's new evidence.
Okay, so this certainly takes it off the radar for, as you're saying, Don, a moment ago, the election in October. We won't see those bad news headlines for the Trudeau government in August playing out. What about Admiral Norman, though? I mean, this is a guy who has been through this now for 2 years, and you know, he spent something like $500,000 on those legal fees, which the government is going to reimburse him for. In other words, the taxpayers, Don, are going to reimburse for all of that as well. I mean, what happens to him now?
Well, you know, he's behaving with extreme dignity given the circumstances. Says, really, just give me my job back. He's not making any threats for civil action, although I'd be shocked if he didn't seek some sort of damages from the government for what they put him through. But he says he wants to go back. Now, that's going to be problematic on a couple fronts. A, he's been replaced as the top military officer on the Navy side. But B, General Vance, the chief of defense staff, who suspended him, said he'd lost confidence in him. So now you're in a situation where you're trying to go back to a boss that said at one point in time he didn't have any faith in you. Although I find it interesting, A, they're going to meet, Vance and Norman are going to meet in the not too distant future. So that's encouraging. And B, they've had communications since his trial began, according to Vice-Admiral Norman. So maybe it's not quite the big chill we thought between the two, but I think it's going to be a little problematic for him to go back, but he seemed willing to try.
One last thing, Don. When you heard this news, what went through your mind? Were you surprised?
Well, yeah, I mean, but on one hand, yes. But on the other hand, it was clear that this was a case that was going to damage the government. And if there was a way for this to be called off, I'm sure they'd be happy to do so. Now, As I said, there is no sign that the PMO or anyone else, the Justice Minister or the Attorney General or anyone else, put pressure on this case to be dropped. But I think it's a good news day for them. And one thing you kept seeing through all this, Todd, was how the government wasn't producing documents readily that, it was going to a judge and documents were being decided whether to go public or not as they went along. Well, there was some stuff in those documents that clearly was going to be a problem. And maybe even the prosecution looked and said, wait a minute, we've got Andrew Leslie, a retired general who's now an MP, Liberal MP, saying, I'm coming forward as a witness for the defense. Well, they kind of went, all this stuff's adding up to one big problem for us. Maybe we should just cut and run.
What a tangled web. Thank you for this, Don.
Oh, yeah. You bet, Todd.